All right, everybody. How you doing? This is the Cheech and Manny Music Podcast. And today we got a great one. We got a special one. It is the prehistoric years of Rush leading up to Caress of Steel. And we have
Mhm.
a great show packed with a lot of information. And here, well, before I introduce you to Manny, I just want to say Rush is my all-time favorite band for many reasons. The first reason, Rush, the music, the musicianship, the lyrics, the fact that I learned philosophy from them,
Mhm.
history, and poetry. They're a walking, a musical college. What they are. So that's just my take on the greatest band in the world. Manny, how you doing today?
Fine, brother. Greetings from Salt Lake City, Utah now.
Good old Salt Lake City.
Good
Yeah, traveling,
Mormon,
man.
right.
Yeah.
I was gonna say like Mormon center over here.
Yeah, I know you were telling me.
But
Sounds interesting.
but to get back on track, yeah, reasons I love Rush, honestly, I consider them probably one of the greatest bands ever to exist. Like if I were to make a top 10, in the top 10, like
Oh
no
yeah, oh
doubt.
yeah, no
Like
doubt,
they're
definitely.
amazing. And I agree with you. Like they're they're like a university. Like
Oh
if you
yeah,
listen
yeah, yeah.
to all their albums, you are gonna get an intellectual education on so many topics. And you're right,
Oh hey,
especially with an emphasis on philosophy. Like I think they introduce a
yes,
lot of people to philosophy. So I
yeah,
guess we'll talk about that in a later show because we could do probably
yeah,
1,000 episodes on Rush.
yeah. The Ayn Rand philosophy, especially that
Yeah,
me and you always talk about and stuff.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
in this episode, we're gonna talk about stuff that I don't think a lot of people talk about. It's in the documentary, and I
Mm.
recommend anybody who's new to Rush to check out the documentary. I can't think of the name of it right
Let,
now. You remember?
while you're talking, let me look it up while you're talking.
Yeah.
So I
Um,
agree.
it's a great documentary, and it spans the early years all the way up until
Mhm.
before Neil passed, so it was like probably Snakes and Arrows maybe or something
Yeah.
like that. I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but I love all the early stuff on it. A lot of
So
great
I see
footage.
it. So documentary, yeah. If you love documentaries, must watch. If you love music, it's called Rush Beyond the Lighted Stage, 2010. It came out. It's
Yes. Oh
fantastic.
yeah. So it's about Snakes and Arrows era. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So phenomenal. Highly recommend it.
Agreed.
So let's get started. And I have notes, so I'm gonna have to. I may have to turn my light on anyway.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. And I guess we'll start here. Like, we're gonna talk about the formation. Yeah, you call it prehistoric rush, which I like.
yeah.
Um,
So
before anything.
before, the funny thing about these guys, they were in middle school when they met. Imagine that, like they're in middle school,
It's
like
funny.
14 years old.
Dude, I teach middle school right now, and I'm
Right, right. So the next rush,
flabbergasted.
like you might be teaching the next rush. You never know.
That's no, listen, that's why, listen, I view my students, it's not about how smart you are, it's,
Yeah.
talents you have. Because just imagine these
Oh my
guys in
God.
middle school, and I bet you teachers passed on them. Like,
Oh, well, they all quit high school.
there we
And, I,
go.
and I'll get to that. Even Neil Peart quits
It's
high school. The
amazing.
guy's a freaking genius, right? Like
Cheech, I think
anyway.
Yeah, I was gonna say Neil Peart philosopher, but yeah,
He's a total. He's a professor. But
professor, hands
funny,
down.
fun fact: why they called him the professor? Now I thought it was because he's a professor, but I think Alex came up that he looked like the professor from Gilligan's Island. That was the joke that they had about Neil that I read in one of my many Rush books that I have.
Dude, who made that?
And
Alex?
probably because he's like the Joker.
It sound it sound it
He's
sounds
the
like it.
comedian, you know. And I love the
That's
sense of
funny.
humor. Like, when you see Alex and Getty, they're so playful when they're in
Yeah.
interviews. They're not
Yeah.
sitting there all serious, and
They're not,
they just
yeah,
seem.
yeah.
I wish one of my fantasies was to ever meet them. I even went out to Toronto and was going to the areas where they live. I'm gonna run into Getty. I know I am, but I didn't. But I'm sure they would be real nice people to meet because they seem so cool.
Yeah. No, I was
So
gonna
quick.
say just based on interviews,
Yeah.
so down to earth.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely,
Mhm.
man.
Mhm.
So Prehistoric Rush. We'll start off with they came from a funny place, a funny name in
Mhm.
Toronto called Willowdale, which sounds like something
Willowdale.
out of
Yep.
like Lord of the Rings or something like that, you know.
No,
Willowdale,
serious. Yeah, it does. No,
Willowdale, Toronto.
and
It
Cheech. So, and
formed,
then correct me if I'm wrong. This is the years 1968 to 1974,
yes,
right?
exactly.
Before
Yeah,
anything, right? Okay.
when they got their deal from when they were playing the Coffin, these little teen
Yep.
centers to
Yep.
actually playing, arenas.
Yep.
So 1968, John Rutsey, not John Rusty, I used to say all
Rutsey.
the time, John Rutsey. And I
Rutsey,
when I
right?
was in, yeah, John Rutsey, he had passed away a few years back, and I was lucky to see his ashes at a crematorium in Toronto, and paid my homage
Wow.
to him. It was really nice because I love him as a drummer, and we'll talk about his drummer
Mhm.
compared to the professor. Um,
Mhm.
1968. There's a guy named Alex Lifeson, John Rutsey, and a bass
Mhm.
player named Jeff Jones. So Rush
Mhm.
was a trio without Geddy Lee. Now it's like something you can't imagine.
Right.
Can't even fathom like Rush
No.
without Geddy Lee. It's
No.
like saying my
No.
hand without a thumb.
Yeah.
Does it exist?
No.
So they had Jeff Jones on bass, and then he couldn't. I don't know. The story was he couldn't get a ride to Alex's house, and they're in middle school or whatever. So he said, "Call this guy Gary," and they knew Gary already. Alex knew Gary, and Gary is Getty. You know.
There we
So and
go.
there's a story to that, but I don't want to go on about how Getty got his name. But so basically, Getty joins the band and they start to become sort of like a cover band, and they start doing songs from
Yeah.
the stuff from their era.
No, and Cheech, you know what I'm
Cream,
seeing here? I was gonna say Cream, Jimi Hendrix, John
mhm.
Mayall,
John
like
Mayall,
all
who just
the
passed away. Yeah,
oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Un-
rest in
and,
peace.
and anybody who doesn't know John Mayall, if you're new to this kind of music, one of the best blues guitar players in the
Oh,
world.
he released I forgot the album that he released in the 1960s, which is phenomenal blues rock.
Yeah, yeah. He,
Right.
he he's just incredible. And here's what's his name? John McVie from Fleetwood Mac played with him.
Oh, there we go.
Uh,
Who's who?
and we'll throw out a shout out. Our good friend Joe Silkman
Yeah.
saw him live, not that many years ago. He said, and the funny thing was, John Mayall was selling his own T-shirts. He was running his own merch table. It's like, oh my God, a
It's
legend
so
running his own
so
merch
rock and
table.
roll.
Joe always told me that. Crazy.
That's amazing.
So they're playing these hits from that era, and then
Mhm.
for some strange reason they kick Getty out. They kick Getty out of the band,
Right.
and another guy joins named Joe Pernay or whatever, and they did
Mm.
one gig with him, and then they fired him. They wanted Getty back. Getty comes back, and then they hired a keyboard player, named Lindy Young and Mitch Boss,
Mhm.
a keyboard player and a guitar player. So Rush was a five-piece band at one time. Could you
Mm.
imagine that?
Five-piece
Now,
band.
a five-piece band.
Wow.
So they're doing that, and then for some reason they just said, let's ditch the guitar player and the keys, and they became the Rush we love and know now. John
Hmm.
Rutsey, Alex, and Getty.
Hmm.
And at that time, like every great band in every scene, like our Neil K's,
Yeah.
somebody has to help you. And
Yep.
they found a guy named Ray Daniels, found him.
Yep.
They went to high school with him. And he must have been way ahead of his time because he was a manager, a promoter, and he opened up the doors for Rush.
Mm.
So, a couple of things, like we said, the stars lined up for Rush in
Hmm.
1972, 73 when they were a trio.
Hmm.
Um, the drinking age was 21 in Canada. It went
Yep.
down to 18. So that means they were able to perform
Yeah.
6 nights a week, play in the clubs, and then they quit high school. They were just exhausted. Who,
Yeah.
imagine
Yeah.
playing clubs and then going to high school and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there was such a scene. And then Ray started a record label called Moon Records.
Mhm.
Got them in the studio. They started to record the first album, and they weren't happy with it.
1973 now at this point.
This is about 73. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
They're not happy with it. So they bring
You
in
see, wait, do you know the first single? It's a cover of Not Fade Away by Buddy Holly, which,
exactly.
you
Yeah,
know, no,
that's a
love
great
Buddy
Manny.
Holly, but
That's a great point.
dude, no, love Buddy Holly myself, but that is not Rush.
Yeah, and that actually like it charted somewhere. I don't know
Yeah.
on your research. It said that it charted like on whatever
So,
local stations or
Cheech, I
whatever.
have here really, no, I don't have it, but it did chart.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they put that as a single. They weren't happy with it, and I don't know how Ray did this, but somehow I kind of guessing he got a hold of Terry Brown,
Hmm.
who was well known at the time from and the engineer of Axis Bold as Love, as we know, Jimi
Yeah.
Hendrix. So just on that alone, he engineered that album, and a huge band called April Wine from Canada. I believe they were from Montreal. He produced them. So they get Terry Brown in there, and
Mm.
then they release. Well, they didn't. They were about to release Rush, and as they're about to release Rush, he gets them their biggest gig ever,
Mhm.
opening up for a huge band. And who do you think that is? Let's see. Do you know, Manny?
The New York Dolls.
Yes.
And I think
Rush.
for those and no, and explain to those viewers that don't know who New York Dolls are. Who are they?
Oh, the New York Dolls are like the predecessors of glam of Kiss. I even
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
they were connected to Kiss through Wicked Lester, which is the pre-Kiss band.
Mhm.
David Johansen was the singer of that band who went on to be Buster Poindexter. That's like in the '90s. God. But yeah, they were just a huge. I mean, to the point of glam, like glam metal. They wore dresses and shit. Like they were,
Yeah.
they
Or like
yeah,
prototype for glam metal before it was a
yeah, oh
thing.
yeah, yeah.
Definitely
Them and
prototype.
bands like Sweet at the time, they were
Yep.
American. They were probably predecessor to punk too. If you
Yeah,
if you
for
think so.
sure. Sure.
you know. So Rush opens up for the New York Dolls, and then at that same time he puts the album out on Moon Records
Mhm.
after Terry Brown mixes it and re-engineers it, and he sends it to Cleveland. Now I have to find the name. I don't know if you have the radio station.
Let me see.
Um,
Uh, so was it? Hold on. So
I have it. WMMS.
MMS in Cleveland. Yep.
Yes, Donna Helper.
Yep.
Helper is her name.
Yep.
He gets it to her, and she plays it, and the the people in Cleveland are calling her up, and they're saying, "Oh, the new Zeppelin's out." Because during that time, Zeppelin was in between albums,
Right.
and we'll
Right.
talk. We're gonna talk about that because definitely heavily influenced by the great
Yep.
Led Zeppelin. You know,
Yep.
and so then Cleveland loves it. Working class town that it was, they embraced Working Man. Became like
Yeah.
#1 on the charts.
Yep.
And then Ray got it to Cliff Bernstein, who signs them to Mercury Records.
Mhm.
Getty is like 19. They're like 19 years old. They're kids, man. They're just not
Crazy.
even like right out of high. They didn't even graduate high school, but like college age. Gets signed to Mercury. John Rutsey basically, poor guy had type 1 diabetes, so
Hmm.
he struggled with that. And he didn't like touring, and he didn't like the direction Rush was going in because they wanted to be more proggy.
Hmm.
Not that the first album is proggy, but they didn't want to be like that. They didn't want to. Rutsey wanted to be more like Bad Company and Free
Hmm.
and that kind of thing. So he plays with them for a little bit. They get signed. They have 2 giant tours opening up for Manfred Mann's Earth Band, who were huge at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
Uriah Heep, who was huge at the
Mm-hmm.
time. Um, and I actually got the honor to meet the bass player at one of these jams on Tuesday nights. This guy Mark Clark, who was like, "Oh my God, I got to meet the bass player from Uriah Heep, um, who played on Demons and Wizards." It's just a side note. So now let's talk about, and I want you to talk about, let's talk about the new guy, how they found the new guy, because Rutsy quits,
Yep.
and they're like, imagine being these two young kids signed to Mercury, a giant tour. They got a 20-minute slot opening up for
Mm-hmm.
giant band, and they got no drummer. So
Mm-hmm.
now what happens?
Well, yeah, no. And before actually, no, well, I'll let you take the because we're gonna this is leading up to the legendary Neil Peart and how
Yeah,
he got,
yeah,
how he was discovered, right? And
yep,
yeah, no, and it's crazy because yeah, I think they were gonna open up to more. Let me see if I got my notes here. Uriah Heep and Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Yeah, they were gonna open up to about 11,000 people, so they
yeah,
needed to
yeah.
find a drummer ASAP. And I
They
found
had.
here that they temporarily had someone named Gary Fielding for a little
I didn't
bit. Did you
even
hear about
that
this?
that I didn't even know.
I
Wow.
discovered this. Yeah, so they temporarily replaced him because again, like you mentioned,
I wonder if
Rutsy. Yep,
any gigs with them. He must have. I wonder.
that's a great point. Again, I just
Anybody,
discovered this.
please feel free to put comments down,
Yep,
our viewers,
please.
on stuff that we might have missed or whatever, because there's so many things on Rush.
So
It's like
many.
it's insane. Um, so they had the audition day. Well, a little bit to go back to Neil.
Hmm.
Neil Peart quit high school and he went to Europe to be
Hmm.
a musician because he figured that's where all the great bands were coming from, and that's where you had
Hmm.
to go to make it. He was a kid, he probably didn't know better, you know,
Yep.
but that's what he did, and he didn't do well. He didn't do well in Europe. Came back, felt like he failed, got a
Hmm.
job at his father's farming equipment store that he probably would have inherited, and he was just working there, and he figured he'd play drums as a hobby, crazy. And these two rock and roll guys walk in looking for him, and the father says to Neil, "There's these two weird guys that want to meet you outside," and they set up the audition. And to be a fly on the wall at that audition, they auditioned five guys that
Five
day.
guys. Yep.
Neil Neil comes out. They think he's a weird guy. He's got this weird car and all these drums, and sets up and he starts playing like the intro to Anthem. And
Hmm.
Getty's in love, like, oh my God. And him and Getty hit it off about music, books, philosophy right away. A
Hmm.
rumor has it Alex was a little bit like, tired and burnt out from auditioning. He wasn't sure if he was going to go with Neil. I always find that funny. That's just a rumor that I've heard.
Honestly, there's a lot of
So,
truth to it, though.
yeah. And so they hit it off. Obviously, Neil comes in, and I sent you a cool picture of Neil
You
today
did.
holding up the first album. That's right
Mhm.
during this period.
That might
You
be
know, uh,
maybe the thumbnail for the video. So,
yeah, yeah, definitely. So they go on these tours with Uriah Heep, Manfred Mann. They go to Cleveland, play a bunch of shows, come to the States. Then Mercury's like, all right, got to go in the next. Got to put out a new album, and they go in and they put out. You just said, I think you said it's probably one of your favorite albums.
1975's Fly By Night, which, by
Yeah.
the way, like I think like when I got exposed to Rush, eventually we'll talk about it, but obviously with moving pictures, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I re-listened to Fly By Night recently, and I noticed how amazing the album is, and I think it's underrated.
Oh
Like
yeah, yeah.
it's hidden behind Rush's, other fantastic catalog that you listen to Fly By Night, I think it's this band in like high form, and the
Oh
prog
yeah.
is out there. It's a mix of the prog and the early stuff, which we'll talk
Mhm.
about when we get
Oh
into
yeah.
the
I totally
albums.
agree. Yeah, like I think the progginess comes out on Bytor and the Snow Dog.
Oh,
'Cause,
without a
like
doubt.
that was the beginning of like, wow, this band is gonna be a prog rock band. I mean, you listen to the drum solo on that, it's like, oh my God.
Oh yeah,
And then they broke it down into like, I don't know, 7 sections,
it's
uh,
complex. The
return to
arrangement.
Prince and all that,
Hmm.
who winds up in Caress of Steel, you
Yeah,
know.
and it
Um,
should be noted that, and I'm not sure with Alex and Getty, but uh, Peer love fantasy and science fiction,
yes,
which
yeah.
that's because he'll become one of the prime lyricists. So
Oh yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
subsequent Rush albums, like Peer brought, and he was I think they were impressed with his vocabulary range because of his reading. He was a prolific
yes.
Peer was a prolific reader.
It was always reading a
Mhm.
cigarette and a book. He always had. Um, and also Fly By Night, the single, that
Mhm.
totally did really good. Like
Yeah,
it was on the radio, especially in Cleveland here in the States, and you
yeah,
still hear it on the radio every now and then.
yeah.
I remember being like, wow, you always hear Tom Sawyer, you always hear
No,
Limelight.
no, Cheech, it
But
makes the classic rock circuit. Like it's a classic.
yeah, yeah. And the album is different because it has some mellow things in there, like we talked
Yeah,
about Rivendell, about Lord
yeah,
of the Rings,
yeah.
back to Lord, an acoustic
Nice
song.
acoustic number, and I think has a lot of sweet Geddy Lee vocals, like
And I
very
think it might
smooth.
tie Necromancer too at some
Mhm.
at some point. They were tying things into each album, which is cool.
Mhm.
Um, in the End, which I love, that's probably one of my second favorite Rush songs.
Mhm.
Anthem, which opens up side two, and Anthem was basically Ayn Rand book,
Mhm.
and they took the whole Ayn Rand concept, making memories.
Yeah.
That was a song written about them touring together, becoming friends, becoming Rush. So any newer, younger viewers who don't know Fly By Night, buy it, download it, whatever you
Buy
do,
it,
play it
download it,
right
listen
now,
to it, like
right now.
right now. I'm telling you,
And if you're a drummer or a bass player, do it
oh,
yesterday. Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
you should have done it weeks ago.
exactly.
A
So
fantastic album.
you want to lead up to the next album?
Yeah. So, okay. So, like you mentioned before, Fly By Night did super well. So the Fly By Night song, I think it reached number 45 in Canada. The whole album did number 9 in Canada, was certified platinum. Fantastic, right? And in the US, it sold about 1 million copies, which not bad, right?
1 million
So they
copies in
fought
the US?
a
Wow.
million copies, yeah.
A second album. That's
Second album. Yeah. And it makes sense because, before we talk about their third album, the record label expected a lot from them, right? So this is setting up what's going to end up happening. But they
yeah.
followed Fly By Night with 1975's Caress of Steel.
And here's an important thing: 2 albums in 1 year, and a bunch of tour dates. Like they toured like constantly, and they put out 2 albums in 1 year. Who does that? I
Who
don't think
does
fans
that?
are doing that now. Like, I mean, yeah, you throw shit on Spotify, but back in the day, like that means you spent 365 days a year
Working.
touring.
Or-
Touring. You didn't have a life and
It's,
doing what you love.
it's unbelievable.
And they
It's
all did it.
unbelievable.
Zeppelin did it. Zeppelin put out I think 2 albums in 1 year as well. It
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
that the bands did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and then so then they go in the studio with a lot of pressure following Fly By Night,
Hmm.
Caress of Steel, and want to talk a little bit about Caress of Steel.
Yeah. So Caress of Steel is an interesting album because it's their first. We got a taste of it with By Tor and the Snow Dog, but then they upped the prog by 100 on the
Oh my God!
tracks The
Yeah,
Necromancer and The Fountain of Lamneth, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's a fantastic album, but I will say it is a challenging listen. I don't know if you would agree or disagree.
Well,
Um,
the trend that they did, and a lot of critics didn't like it because at the
they
time,
hated it.
yeah, the critics hated that album. But this is where Rush got bashed by a lot of critics, and like Rolling Stone, which I always piss me off, for
Yeah, I
bashing
know.
Rush. But Rush was not like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or they would put out like an album that was dedicated to the concept of like three albums, side one,
Yep.
side two, the next album, side one. Rush
Yep.
had a trend of doing four regular songs that kind of had nothing to do with the concept that was on the
Yep.
next album, which might have been confusing to the listener, but it never bothered me because they were always great songs. You
I will
know, and
say to add to that, just a little connection here. Like I'm a huge Genesis fan, and for our
yeah,
listeners
oh
who
yeah,
don't know who Genesis are, before the Phil Collins front version, the Peter Gabriel, early 1975s, mid 1970s. No, so
yep,
early 1970s, mid 1970s, they were releasing some of the most proggiest albums that you'll ever listen to,
yeah,
and
yeah,
greatest albums as well. And so they follow that model where you said where they would put on, like, for example, 10-minute song, 20-minute
mhm,
epic, and I
yeah,
was used to it. So when I first listened to Caress of Steel, I loved it. I was like, whoa,
oh
like,
yeah, yeah.
the 20-minute, I think the Fountain of Lament is 20 minutes, right?
It's 20 minutes, and Neil wrote it like a novel. He wanted to start off in the
Yep.
valley, starting
Yep.
it off and ending with it in the valley. So that's the epitome of art rock. You're putting it like a
Mhm.
book, and it
Yep.
read and not reads it listens like a book.
Mhm.
There's some, it gets real heavy, and Getty's dynamics, the way he sang, he would get like loud and then he'd get really soft, which he
Yep.
did, of course, 2112, which was beautiful the way he did that. But that was a great dynamic.
Mhm.
And then you talk about the opening song, like was one of my all-time favorite songs of all time,
Mhm.
and a history lesson. Bastille Day.
Bastille
I
Day.
mean,
Yeah.
kicks ass, and it's giving you a friggin' history lesson on the French Revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let him eat cake. You know what I mean? Like so Bastille Day, and then we talked about Lakeside Park, which was a
Yep.
nod to Neil growing up, like his.
And his
I say it
summer
was like,
work as a
yeah,
teenager.
like
Very great song.
yeah, it's a beautiful song. Yeah.
Beautiful song.
Um, then I think I'm going bald, which is like it could have been on the first album. It's a bluesy, it's almost
Hmm.
a funny. It's funny actually.
I thought it
You
was
know,
funny. Hmm.
it's a funny kind of song. And then the next side gets into the whole concept,
Yep. Yep.
and they put it out, and
And,
what
they-
what
and no, and they were so proud of it before the
oh,
reception. I remember watching a documentary. Like Neil Peart was saying, they were so proud of what they've done.
oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
when they got the reaction of what they got, they were so disappointed.
Yeah, and the funny story was when before it came out, they were touring with Kiss, and I sent you a nice picture today of Peter, Chris,
Hmm.
and Neil,
Hmm.
which is so funny. Uh, and they had Paul come in the car, and they're listening to it, and they're all excited. They're all young kids. Paul's at the height of Kiss, and Paul's reaction, they said, was just like, "Huh? Like what?" And then they were like, "Oh my God, he didn't even like, he
No,
didn't
and,
even
and
really."
no, no, and think about it. At this point, Kiss, this is
75.
1975, so Kiss was on, they were kings of rock and roll. They knew,
I was about to come out in the next couple of months. It was
right.
at the.
So for Kiss to give you that reaction, heartbroken.
I know. And then the critics. Oh well, okay. Before we talk about the critics, they toured with it. They toured with
Mhm.
Ted Nugent, and Ted Nugent was also going through a rough,
Struggling. Yeah.
struggling as. And they were playing smaller venues. Um, the crowds weren't coming,
Yep.
and they called it the Down the Tubes tour.
Hmm.
Then the critics just friggin' destroyed them. I heard one. Oh man, this is the worst review, and it might have been those assholes at Rolling Stone magazine. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. I don't care. Never liked Rolling Stone magazine.
Rolling Stone always gets it wrong.
They always did. Well, Rush did make it to the cover of Rolling Stone in 2015. Finally,
Mhm.
thank God. But they never gave Rush a break. They hated Rush. One of the critics from Rolling Stone said Geddy Lee sounds like a cat going through a blender when he sings. Like Jesus
which is
Christ.
which is funny but messed up.
And this is even worse than that. Somebody said Neil Peart. Oh, this is at a live concert. A critic at a live show said Neil Peart, don't quit your day job. I mean, like, really?
So
This is what they were getting in 1975. You know,
and again, imagine like them being proud of what they thought, they made a masterpiece, and hearing those
yeah,
critics, that must have been heartbreaking, especially for Neil Peart.
devastating, devastating. And actually, they did go back to their day jobs for a short period because
They
I
did.
heard Alex was pumping gas, because they weren't making any money.
Mhm.
Uh, because they didn't. I don't think they didn't get the publishing deal that they got until after 2112, where they were
Yep.
set.
Yep. Yep.
So I think Caress of Steel to me is one of my favorite Rush albums, but it was like it's like wine or something. It needed to age with time.
I 100% agree. It's
And
I think we talked about this. It's a very misunderstood album, but in retrospect, it it's like the archetype of what they would do going forward. Like, but they would get stronger with it.
yeah,
They, especially their storytelling abilities. I guess Neil Peart, as
oh
his
yeah,
lyricism started to sharpen,
yeah,
and started to become more focused. It's the prototype, but I think very misunderstood
definitely.
and
And
a hard listen. I will agree.
oh,
It's a challenging listen.
it is not, not maybe not the first side, the second side. Back in the 70s, people really listened and people were smoking a lot of dope and
Yeah.
having fun. It was like that kind of trippy. And even Geddy Lee had to admit that maybe they were smoking a little too much Acapulco Gold, just going around 74, 75, you
Cheech,
know.
in the documentary, I think it was a documentary, they said that looking back at it now, looking at Caress of Steel, they don't get it. Like, like it's listen, it's great.
That's a scary thing for them to say. They don't, but I, I still love it. I still listen to it. And
Mhm.
and here's a very important thing, which I forgot to bring up. Hugh Sims, that was his first
Yeah,
contribute to the artwork of Rush,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that artwork is beautiful. It could
It's
be
stunning.
a piece of work in a museum. I think.
Mhm. Wait, Cheech, do
That
you
that
have the original vinyl? Do you have?
I do. I unfortunately I had it, and then my cellar got flooded a couple of years
Oh,
ago.
okay,
I got
okay.
the original, but I bought it at a record store, and we had a bad flood, 2020, I think,
Mhm.
21, Worcester. You remember, like I forgot when it was, and it destroyed my whole basement. It destroyed a lot of
Oh
stuff, but
no.
yeah, that Caress of Steel was on that. But
No,
anyway,
no, because you actually saw the physical album, and me just looking at the photo art, yeah, it's beautiful. Like
oh
it
yeah.
looks like it belongs in front of a one of the Lord of the Rings books or something, you know?
Well, I think that was the point. I think, Neil was definitely going for Lord of the Rings because
There we
once
go.
again that was a popular book at that. Well, I think
Influence
what
Led
year
Zeppelin, Genesis, all the prog bands loved Lord of the Rings
it came out? Well, Tolkien put that out in the
in the
30s or
50s,
40s.
so they grew up with it.
So it was around, but then the hippie culture definitely encompassed it in all the bands and stuff. So Neil definitely was studying a lot of that stuff,
Mhm.
reading about putting it in there. And it did it maybe people just didn't get it, it was just it was too out there. Uh and they really wanted to be proggy. Maybe they tried too hard to be like Yes or Emerson Lake and
Hmm.
Emerson. Not, I'm just saying that I disagree. I think I'd rather hear Rush than Yes or Emerson, Lake and Palmer any day, in my opinion.
Right,
But
right,
because Rush was more compact,
right.
like
And they
like
started out, and that's important because they started out as their early stuff is like a tight blues, hard rock,
yeah,
FM radio sound. Like it would make sense
yeah,
how this album alienated their initial
yeah.
fan base.
Let's go back to that. Like So the first album, and we talked about John Rutsey, cannot compare the guy to the professor, Neil. But when we talked about this, John Rutsey is a great, solid,
Great
amazing
drummer.
rock coming from the Simon Kirke, John Bonham vibe.
Dude, he
Worked on the
sounds like he sounds like he would belong in like Derek and the Dominoes or
exact
like
exact.
great drummer, has a nice
Yeah.
beat,
And he
backbeat, like
he was a young guy as well. He was
mhm,
18 years old, you know.
mhm.
And so I always give John Rutsey credit for that album. And it's it's almost like, Ozzy and Dio era.
Mhm.
John Rutsey and Neil Peart. It's the two different bands. Rush is
Two
two different
different.
bands from
Yeah.
that first album to the Fly By Night.
Mhm.
But first album to me is I always listen to it. It's I put it up there with one of my favorite albums. So many, Working Man is such a
Great
great
song.
great album.
It
Fine,
sounds like a song where it would belong on like a Black Sabbath album. Very heavy.
yeah, and they jam. It's almost like a jam band. And you're
Yeah.
listening to the
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
this cool things. Um, in the mood, finding my way. What you're doing is a total like it's almost like Heartbreaker.
Yep.
Down,
Yep.
down.
I was gonna say,
No,
well, the debut album sounds like Led Zeppelin one. If anything,
oh,
like it's
they were,
fantastic.
yeah, yeah. Alex guitar tone is very Jimmy Page, like
Yep.
on that
Yep. Yeah.
that dirt. Like, it's that perfect '70s rock guitar tone.
Perfect.
Alex tone
Yeah.
is like,
Yeah.
he's probably playing. I'm not sure exactly, but he was probably playing a Les Paul going right through a fucking Marshall. That's what it sounds
Hmm.
like. I'm pretty sure it is.
I was
If
gonna say
anybody,
his guitar playing is dirty on that album.
if anybody knows what he was playing, please put it in the comments. I mean, I'm not
Put it in the
100%,
comments.
but yeah, and
Wait,
you know
Cheech, so
the
just to give a heads up, 1 minute left.
okay.
Any key takeaways before we finish part one here?
Yes, I'm gonna be quick. Rush. Well, you Sims. He wrote the Starman. He drew the Starman.
We'll end
So
up doing
that's
the Starman logo.
the Eddie of he made like Derek Riggs was the artist who made Eddie. You
Hmm.
Sims made the Terry Brown, Ray Daniels, Rush in the music,
Hmm.
and you Sims. They're all a part of Rush. That's what made Rush. Rush didn't make it alone. They needed those three other guys to get them out there. And Ray Daniels is a huge part of Rush, of what Rush did. What like
Hmm.
making them. So I think we covered a lot from
For part
prehistoric.
one.
Yeah, and we'll be. I think the next video we'll be talking about that crazy album called 2112.